Hey honey, I just transferred last month's paycheck to you. Make sure you check your account. Catherine and I have been married for 3 years. Each month, the first thing I do with my salary is send it to her account. This month, since the sales weren't that great, she wasn't too happy and said, "Why only $90,000? The day I sent Catherine the money, she went out and dropped $88,000 on a men's watch. Tomorrow is our anniversary. Even though it stung a bit, I was mostly excited. When I was about to take a good look at the watch, she snatched it and flatly said, "This watch isn't for you." On our anniversary, I saw that same watch on Calvin's wrist. Calvin is Catherine's crush. I'm a sales consultant. Today was the day I couldn't wait to get off work. It's our 3rd wedding anniversary and I booked a nice spot at a fancy restaurant. We planned to celebrate tonight. I turned down all my work events and was excited the whole afternoon. But then, just as I was about to leave, a big deal came knocking. Catherine showed up at our dealership, and I spotted her right away. I thought she came to pick me up. I grabbed a fruit tea I bought and walked over to her. She slowly turned and saw me too. Her face showed a flicker of guilt. "Oh, Jack, what are you doing here?" That's when it hit me. In 3 years, she never asked where I worked. She only knew I got paid on the 15th each month, and I'd send my salary to her right away. She didn't even know what I did for a living. Whenever someone asked her, she'd say I was in research, afraid to lose face. Luckily, my performance was decent, and no one ever questioned it. I thought she found out and gave her the tea. "I work here. You're here to pick me up, right? I'm off soon." She stammered, not really saying anything. Just then, a familiar voice called from behind me. "Catherine, why are you just standing there? Can't you get inside? Parking here's such a hassle." Turning around hit me like a ton of bricks. It was Calvin, a college friend, heir to a big group, and Catherine's crush. Catherine felt awkward, and from behind me, said, "Calvin wanted to buy a car, so I brought him here for you to help boost your sales." I knew she was lying. She had no clue I worked there, and this was just a random encounter. Calvin and I locked eyes, and he looked surprised, then laughed. "Hey, isn't it Jack? Catherine said you were into research, but checking your attire, you're working here, right?" My face darkened, and I didn't respond. Calvin chuckled. "Just kidding, hope you don't mind." Handing the tea to Catherine, she took it and tossed it in a trash can, telling me, "How many times have I told you I don't like fruit tea?" She once said she loved fruit tea and avoided milk tea to not gain weight. I realized then she was embarrassed by me. The two walked in, arm in arm, and I watched silently. After inspecting the cars, they settled on a $600,000 one. Calvin glanced at his watch, saying lightly, "Let's go with this one. I won't be driving it anyway. It'll just be a company vehicle. Let's put this on Jack's sales. It's a car bought regardless of place. Just doing you a favor, Jack, considering Catherine." His words were so mocking, so disrespectful. All I could focus on, though, was the watch on his wrist. The one Catherine bought with my last month's salary. She said it wasn't for me. Turns out it was for Calvin. Catherine remarked, "Jack, shouldn't you thank Calvin? He's your VIP client today." I signed off on the deal with mixed feelings. Afterward, they walked out holding hands, and I saw a faint lipstick mark on Catherine's neck. I wanted to confront them, remind Catherine of our anniversary, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. As they got in the car, Catherine, who once hated cigarette smoke, lit one for Calvin. Without looking back, she left with him, ignoring our plans. A co-worker teased, "Wow, landing a big deal at the end of the day. Gonna make about $20,000 from this, huh?" I just smiled. There was no joy in closing this deal. I sat alone at the restaurant I booked, ate some steak, drank some wine, paid, and left. Standing by the street, I lit a cigarette, waiting for a ride. I came across Calvin's social media post. It read, "Just like old times." The picture was of a woman sitting on a hotel bed. From the birthmark on her arm, I knew it was Catherine. I had to accept Catherine wasn't mine today. Back home, I lay, exhausted, on the couch. Ignoring Catherine's warnings, I lit another cigarette. Through the smoke, Memories of Catherine filled my mind. We met in college, dated 4 years, married for 3. Catherine was the college beauty, popular with everyone. Calvin was a classmate, a rich kid with good looks and charm. 2 people started having feelings for each other. In their freshman year, they officially announced they were together. People often say college is like a mini society and college students are newbies in real-world scenarios. That's actually pretty true. Rumor had it that Calvin managed to win Catherine over one weekend night with his status and a $3,000 handbag. Once they got together, their classmates congratulated them, saying they were a match made in heaven. But as time went by, the balance of their love started to shift. Maybe it was because it was too easy for Calvin to win her over, or maybe he just got tired. Calvin became less attentive to Catherine and began messing around with other girls. Meanwhile, Catherine was deeply immersed in the relationship. She was known for being overly jealous, and it got worse because of Calvin's flirtatious behavior. Graduation season arrived, and Calvin was gearing up to study abroad according to his family's plans. He had originally wanted to bring Catherine along, but her family disapproved. They wanted her to focus on graduating and starting her career rather than pinning her future on a guy. Calvin, without saying much, decided to break up with Catherine and took a younger girl with him, someone he had been seeing at school. This new girl wasn't as pretty as Catherine but had a figure that put Catherine to shame. Calvin's message was clear. He was going abroad to further his studies, and if Catherine couldn't come along, they would break up. I clearly remember that day Catherine climbed to the top of the tallest building on campus, threatening to jump if Calvin broke up with her. But Calvin didn't even look at her. He just got into his luxury car with the younger girl. I was a volunteer at school and happened to be there that day. Just as Catherine was about to jump, I showed up behind her and pulled her back, saving her life. My actions were praised by the entire school, and even Catherine admitted later that she regretted it. She realized that if she'd gone through with it, she would have let herself and her parents down. Because of this incident, Catherine began to like me a lot. She pursued me relentlessly, and eventually I gave in. I was just a poor kid from a small town, nowhere near as worldly as someone like Calvin. Having a campus beauty like Catherine chasing after me was thrilling, and I couldn't refuse. That's how we ended up together. We studied marketing, and though I had good grades and could have chosen to work closer to my hometown with more opportunities, I chose to stay in her city for her. During graduation season, we sat in the school library, polishing each other's resumes and spent our days attending interviews, discussing which companies had better career prospects. After landing jobs, we celebrated, reveling in the fact that we were putting down roots in this city. But as we graduated, Catherine, having wasted her time with Calvin, struggled to stay employed and kept getting dismissed from various companies. To this day, she still doesn't seem interested in finding a job. She claims to have found part-time work online that pays $2,800 a month. I love her, and naturally, I can't stand seeing her suffer, so I took on the responsibility of providing for her. Catherine got used to extravagant spending with Calvin, so I hopped between jobs, seeking higher salaries to support her. After a few jobs, I found myself in car sales, and thanks to my abilities, my performance has been great in recent years. With hard work, I managed to buy a house and car with loans and successfully held a wedding with Catherine. Though life has been tiring, we were genuinely in love and had sweet moments. Life was blissful until 6 months ago when Catherine started to lose herself. More accurately, everything changed when Calvin returned to the country. Single and back home, Calvin repeatedly attempted to wreck our marriage and approach Catherine. I knew Calvin was Catherine's first love, so rather than bothering her, his presence seemed to make her incredibly happy. Whenever I wanted to confront them, Catherine would stop me, quickly followed by a flood of criticism. She called me petty, said I was dirty-minded, and accused me of not trusting her. Catherine's feelings for Calvin caused her to become distant in our marriage. Even in the middle of the night, if Calvin called, she would leave me and rush to be with him. Under the influence of alcohol, I eventually passed out. When I woke, it was the sound of the door opening. I rubbed my sleepy eyes and glanced toward the door. Catherine, wearing a long black dress, walked in. As soon as she entered, she pinched her nose in disgust and said, You smoked again? Didn't I tell you to smoke in the hallway? I really can't stand the smell of secondhand smoke. Please, next time, go outside to smoke. I felt a twinge of sarcasm in my heart, recalling the time she's happily lit Calvin's cigarette. Before I could say more, she willfully placed a watch on the coffee table and casually said, Calvin thinks this watch is too cheap. You can have it as your 3rd anniversary gift. I forced a smile, realizing that in her heart, I only deserved Calvin's leftovers. I didn't even look at the watch but instead slowly said, Did you pay this month's mortgage? No, she replied, unfazed. Not only the mortgage but the utilities, property fees, and gas are also due. We're out of money this month. You should ask your parents for more. My parents are hardworking farmers who barely save $2,000 or $3,000 a year, with not much left after expenses. Last month, behind my back, she already asked for $10,000 from them. Now, after spending my salary on a watch, she's going after my parents again. No way, I said firmly. Last month, we already took 10 grand from them. I can't usually give them money, but asking them again and again? How are they supposed to live? My mom's been eyeing a gold bracelet for 2 years and hasn't splurged on it. So what's your plan? She snapped, pointing at my nose. It's all on you for being so useless, making only 100 grand a month. What is that even good for? Look at Calvin, he earns hundreds of thousands, even millions a month. Both men. Why are you such a loser? She stormed off into the bathroom without letting me respond. I was left speechless with anger. She's watched too many short videos where everyone's making hundreds of thousands, thinking that's normal. For someone like me from a poor family background, making even 100 grand a month these days is tough. But it's never enough for her. She used to sweet talk when spending my money, but ever since Calvin came back, she keeps comparing us. Now, while spending my money, she calls me a failure. She's always been bossy. Whatever she wants, I have to agree. If not, she flips out. Every time I compromise, but this time I just can't. As an only child, I can't solve their problems, but I can't keep leeching off them. Soon, she came back from the bathroom, her tone a bit softer. Honey, I know I've been spending a lot these months. I'll try to cut back. We need to get through these tough times. If we can't pay this month's mortgage, it'll be a hassle. The house could go up for auction, and we'll have no place to stay. So, let's ask your parents for money again. She knows how to mix a slap with a sweet smile. It gets to me because I love her, and she uses it to get me to ask my parents for money again. She said the same things a couple of months ago. I rubbed my cheeks, tiredly saying, I'll figure out the money somehow. But seriously, we can't keep asking my parents. They need to eat too. From now on, let's watch our spending. Just the usual expenses like car and house payments should only be about 10 grand. We should have plenty left over. Normal living isn't that costly. I'm not saying you can't spend, just be reasonable. You said this watch costs 88 grand. That's my whole month's salary. Before I could finish, she picks up the watch from the table and smashes it on the ground. My eyes widened. I was thinking of selling it for a discount, but she destroyed it. I was furious and said, What are you doing? That watch is my month's salary. She didn't back down, acting as if she was right. You blaming me for spending too much? I said I'd be careful later, but you keep nagging. What do you want? Haven't you had enough? At the end of the day, it's because you're useless, can't earn enough. Yet you blame me for your inability. You got pride in being a failure? You think I'd let you give this watch to someone else? I'd rather smash it than let you use it. She sashayed into the bedroom after that. I stared at the smashed watch, her words echoing in my head. Heart pounding, I coughed up dark red blood. She changed her clothes and was about to leave. In a black slip dress, black stockings, high heels with light makeup. She looked stunning. She used to tell me how modest she was. Before, she'd never wear stockings, not even on important outings. Now, I knew who she was dressing for, and my heart ached. This woman I've been with for 4 years, married to for 3. Maybe I never mattered as much as the one she really loves. She glanced at my blood, a faint smirk on her lips. Just 2 words and you're here. Dying? Why don't you just kick the bucket already? make space for the living. I felt another pang in my chest, weakly asked, "This late, where are you going?" "Mind your own business," she snapped. "If you spent more time figuring out how to make more money, you wouldn't complain about me spending too much." She slammed the door shut, not caring about me at all. My eyes blurred with tears. Maybe there's nothing left of our love. She changed, and so has our relationship. I slowly got up, went to rinse my mouth, washed my face with cold water. Suddenly, a strange smell hit me. I traced it back to the stockings on the washing machine. They had been torn at the crotch, visibly distressed. I could imagine the intense fight, and there was a stain around the waistband. That's where the smell came from. It made my skin crawl. I threw them in the trash, taking it out to the hall, feeling slightly better. I bit down hard. I have to cut ties with her for good. After thinking it through, I called my parents. I had to warn them not to give her any more money. They told me Catherine not only asked for another 10 grand, but also took the 50 grand I sent home last year for fixing the house. I was furious. My family's place is falling apart. One good storm could bring it down. On the phone, my dad comforted me. "Son, are you and your wife facing some trouble lately? If you face any difficulty, you need to let your dad know right away. Even if he doesn't have money, he'd sell everything to help you out if he had to." Hearing my dad say this made my heart hurt again. Trying not to worry him, I held back tears and said, "Dad, it's nothing serious. It's just that the company's performance hasn't been great lately. Don't worry, I'll repay the money I borrowed from you within the next month at the latest, plus an extra 50 grand. We can't delay dealing with the house anymore. It's too risky." Dad laughed heartily and said, "Haha, I'm just happy to hear you talk like that. Son, you and your wife use it first. Don't rush with the house. Even if your mom and I get crushed by it, it'll lighten your load. We're getting old anyway." Even though it was a joke, hearing it made tears well up in my eyes, and I quickly hung up the phone. In my mind, I thought about how this heartless woman even took my parents' emergency money. This marriage doesn't seem to mean much anymore. This marriage needs to end. I used to never dare to bring up divorce because I feared she'd agree if I did. I really treasure the feelings we've had all these years. Deep down, I know that even though she's done a lot wrong, I still have love for her. But when I found out she took my parents' emergency money, I suddenly felt lost. I didn't know what the point of our marriage was. I thought I would just keep putting up with it. But it's clear now I can't. I'm exhausted, like I could cough up blood. With the constant heavy workload, my body is already having issues. I brushed off the thoughts in my mind and lay down to sleep. At 2 a.m., a phone call woke me up. Half asleep, I glanced at the screen and saw it was Catherine's college roommate Lily calling. "Jack, I sent you a location. You better come over. I don't know what's gotten into Catherine. She's been drinking a lot tonight. We're all scared to try and stop her because she lashes out at anyone who does. If she keeps drinking like this, something bad will happen." I could faintly hear Catherine's voice in the background. "I really regret marrying that loser Jack. What's wrong with spending a little more money? He nags me constantly. He's not a man. Look at Calvin, he earns more and doesn't care about that stuff. A failure like Jack blames his wife? Why even keep a man like that around?" As I listened closely, I heard Calvin's voice, too. "Totally. If you had married me, Catherine, you'd be living 100 times better." Lily tried to play peacemaker. "Catherine, come on, count your blessings. Your husband makes 100,000 a month, at least. And everyone sees how well he treats you. Good men like him aren't easy to find. How many out there are as great as Calvin?" Bam. Ah. With the sound of a beer bottle smashing and Lily's scream, the call ended. The thought of just leaving her crossed my mind. But somehow, I found myself getting dressed and grabbing a cab to the location Lily sent, which was a bar owned by Calvin. Once there, I spotted them but didn't greet anyone. I sat quietly in a corner. Tonight, I wanted to see how wild things would actually get. Under the flashing lights of the bar, Catherine was in the center of the dance floor living it up. She was holding Calvin with one hand and clutching a beer bottle in the other. At that moment, she had none of the youthful energy she had back in school. Her outfit, style, and movements didn't resemble a married woman at all. She looked just like the ladies who entertain at bars. It was my first time seeing her so unrestrained and out of control. After one song ended, Catherine even kissed Calvin. Everyone around cheered, and the young folks there for fun egged them on. Lucky guy! What a catch tonight. Why wait? Find a room and go until sunrise. Ha ha ha, whose wife is she walking around like this? A couple nearby started arguing. That's the expensive wife you'll end up with. No, that's yours. How dare you curse me? She's obviously not wife material. Marrying that would be a curse. Calvin, with a smirk on his face, took a cigarette from the table, and Catherine actually lit it for him. This moment stung again. That's when one of Calvin's guys noticed me in the corner. Calvin switched off the music and looked at me with a mocking face, not saying a word. Lily rushed over, grabbed Catherine, and shook her gently, whispering, "Catherine, snap out of it. Jack's here to take you home." Really? Stop this nonsense. Do you even realize how overboard you went? I went overboard? Not at all, Catherine shouted, pushing Lily away. What can Jack do? In my eyes, compared to Calvin, Jack's not even worth mentioning. Before Calvin came back, I only used Jack for money. But with Calvin here, what do I need him for? These words cut deep, especially being directed at me. Previously, if I heard her say this, I would have gone mad, embarrassing myself right here with everyone. But now, after hearing her, I had no emotional reaction at all. In my heart, Catherine can no longer affect me. I realize now I'm truly done with her emotionally. Calvin smiled more provocatively, just watching me, waiting for me to step up, claim Catherine, and then get mocked by everyone. He's the one who really branded me with that reputation. Lily became frantic, unscrewing a bottle of water and pouring it over Catherine's head. You want to ruin everything? Wake up. Your husband Jack is here to pick you up. Catherine shook her head hard and finally looked at me. Before I could say much, she pointed at me, fuming, and went on the offensive. Jack, really? We just had a little argument, and you started stalking me? I'm just out with friends, and you had to follow me? Can't I have some privacy? You're not much of a man, so petty. This proves you don't trust me. I gave a short laugh, amused by her rapid-fire questions, and with a slightly stern look replied, Do I really need proof to not trust you? Calvin and his buddies were watching us like we were putting on a show, eyes full of amusement. Catherine, enraged, picked up a glass from the table and smashed it against my face. I staggered back, clutching my lips, blood dripping like beads from a broken necklace, and the glass shattered on the floor. That drew a burst of laughter from Calvin and everyone around. They seemed to be laughing at my weakness, my inability to keep my own wife. At that moment, my heart broke completely. I knew our relationship, like that shattered glass, could never be whole again. I wiped my mouth, thinking I'd take her home and talk about divorce once she sobered up. I reached out saying, You've had too much to drink. Let's go home. Remember? You once told me how much you hated these kinds of places. Just as I turned to leave with her, she slapped me hard across the face. My head rang, and I stumbled back, instinctively letting go of her hand. Catherine pointed at my nose and snapped, Can you get lost? Just leave me alone. You make me sick. I'll be clear today. The one I love isn't you. It's Calvin. Why do you cling to me like a dog? It's really annoying. That slap woke me up. It made me see that the woman in front of me wasn't worth reasoning with. I was completely angered by that slap. Fine. I won't cling to you like a dog anymore. Let's get a divorce. To the people at the bar, this was nothing new. My call for divorce didn't cause much of a stir. Calvin quickly stepped forward, pretending to intervene, but his eyes held nothing but mockery. Jack, you shouldn't talk about divorce so lightly. Don't end such a long relationship over one gathering. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing going on between me and your wife. What she said was just drunken nonsense, and that kiss was just the bar's vibe. You're not mad, are you? He was clearly trying to rile me up, but I ignored him and headed straight out of the bar. As soon as I stepped out, Calvin followed, wearing a smug smile. With no one else around, he taunted me. Jack, how did you manage to land Catherine? Her standards must have really dropped after I left. I glanced at him, not acknowledging his mockery, instead saying, she's drunk. I couldn't take her home, so please take care of her for me. Thanks. Calvin laughed, shaking his head. I thought you'd have more backbone. Turns out you're this soft. Let me tell you, I've been taking care of her for a while now. The most exciting was at your place. He stressed taking care, clearly aiming to provoke me. Seeing I wasn't biting, he continued, I'm openly messing with your wife, and you're not even angry. It's good you're being smart today. If you tried something, you wouldn't have left the bar standing. I looked at him coldly, asking in an icy voice, is that a threat? He smacked my cheek a couple of times, full of disdain. Depends on how you see it. Understood. I turned and walked away without a backward glance. Back home, everything felt surreal. If my face didn't still sting, I'd have thought it was all a bad movie. I took some time off work, shut off my phone, and slept until the next day. By afternoon, I casually ate something and started drafting a divorce agreement. I also reached out to some contacts to dig into Calvin's background. After years in sales, I'd built a solid network, including some big players. What I found was shocking. Calvin had a family overseas. His foreign girlfriend, Wendy, was from a significant family, his main clients in the UK. Without their support, his business there wouldn't survive. I managed to contact Wendy, explaining the situation. She was furious and promised to fly over on her private jet immediately. Catherine stumbled home in the afternoon, collapsing onto the couch and lazily asking, "Get me some water and a hangover pill." I replied flatly, "The kettle's in the kitchen. Get it yourself. Pills are in the cabinet." She was momentarily stunned, as I'd never refused her in our 7 years together. She snapped back, "What do you mean by this? You can't even do me this little favor?" I nodded slowly, calmly stating, "Since you took my parents' house building money, I've decided. We're done. Yesterday, you threw a water cup at me in front of everyone." I pointed at my injured lip and continued, "And you slapped me hard on the face too. Don't you remember?" She started stammering and could hardly say a word. I didn't bother with her and stood up, saying, "I don't want to lecture you. Let's just get divorced." Her eyes focused and she replied, "Fine. A divorce means I can be with Calvin openly, and you can live miserably alone." I scoffed back, "You got it wrong. Divorcing you, my family's, and my living standards will improve big time. When's this happening?" She asked eagerly. I handed her the electronic divorce agreement and said, "Now, you were prepared this whole time." She glared at the papers, then threw my phone on the coffee table, demanding, "We can divorce, but it can't be on your terms. You should leave with nothing." I stared at her in disbelief, shocked by her audacity. Gritting my teeth, I said, "How dare you say that? Do you even know the law? You cheated first. I have proof. Splitting it 50-50 is already generous. What have you ever done for the family? You earn $2,800 a month and act like my $10,000 monthly is nothing. Got any shame left? Even if you sue, you won't win. Don't be so sure." She sneered. "Your reasons are a joke against my connections." She headed to the balcony, calling her phone. "Calvin, he finally asked for a divorce. Help me out." I stared at her back, tempted to grab the fruit knife from the table. But it was a fleeting thought. I had to stay calm for my parents' sake. Outside the civil affairs office, Catherine and I got out of the car one after another. Calvin was already waiting there with a smug grin. "Jack, think it over. Pretty woman like Catherine, losing her could be a big regret." I was done pretending and said bluntly, "Isn't this what you've been aiming for? Let me warn you, Calvin. Catherine's just a pretty face. I earn a decent monthly pay but couldn't keep her happy. She even leeched off my parents. Run out of money, and she's sure to turn on you." Catherine fired back, "Stop trying to come between Calvin and me. You're just a loser. If you were like Calvin, we wouldn't be here." I retorted, "I don't get why you, who earns $2,800 a month, called someone like me who pulls $10,000 monthly a loser. You're like a dog, using up what's mine and still barking at me." Catherine was about to reply when Calvin stopped her, saying coldly, "Why waste your breath? Just divorce him and marry me." That played right into my hand. Mocking Calvin, I said, "Calvin, isn't bigamy illegal here?" Calvin's face darkened, and he snapped, "Jack, shut it." Feigning innocence, I replied, "Am I wrong? You sure you're not married? To your biggest client, Wendy? You married her 3 years ago, right?" Calvin seethed, eyes full of rage, wanting me gone. Catherine was stunned silent. Calvin quickly turned to Catherine, explaining, "Catherine, it's not my fault. Family decision, couldn't refuse." Tears fell as Catherine pulled away. "Why are you still cheating? You claimed to be single. If Jack hadn't exposed this, how long would you have lied?" Panicking, Calvin clung to her, pleading, "I had no choice, Catherine. I only love you. Our views differ and she never saves face. I'm done with her." Meanwhile, I discreetly recorded everything. Catherine shouted, "But you lied. You said you were single. I left Jack for you, and now you're with someone else. What am I supposed to do?" Calvin shot me a fierce glare, despite knowing I didn't care. Who could I blame? I had no savings, lost everything, and dragged my family down with me. Catherine begged Calvin, "I'll divorce Jack soon. Prove your love and divorce her. Marry me." Calvin held her close, reluctantly saying, "Catherine, I can't do that. Our UK business relies on Wendy. Anger her and it'll fall apart." I watched, adding fuel, TSK. "How long will you cry? Stop wasting time, get the divorce done, and move on." Calvin gave me a sinister smile, telling Catherine, "Divorce this loser. Once our UK operation's independent, I'll dump Wendy and marry you." Catherine, like a kitten, nestled into Calvin's chest, softly crying. Seems there's no other way. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I swear I saw a hint of regret in Catherine's eyes. Maybe she's truly regretting it now, but she's already been swept along by Calvin to this point and can't turn back. Once we got into the civil affairs office, I finally understood the weird smile Calvin shot me earlier. Looking around, there wasn't a single suit-wearing government worker in the whole place, just a bunch of Calvin's goons. Catherine and I sat at the service desk, and I couldn't believe it when Calvin adjusted his tie and swaggered over to sit at the office. He grinned and said to me, "I'm handling your divorce today." I didn't hold back and shot back, "Doesn't matter who handles it. Can you even make it legal?" He just nodded with a smile, "Of course. With my family's connections, we have a little pull. If I wanted, I'd have my guys come over and beat you down without a problem. You believe that?" It was a blatant threat. Ignoring him, I tossed the paper divorce agreement on the desk and said, "Look at this. As long as it seems fair to you, sign whenever." Calvin kept grinning at me while glancing at the divorce papers, saying, "Jack, honestly, I don't care about your little assets, but Catherine will fight you for every penny. Not for anything else. I just hate seeing you do well." I sneered back, "Fine, disagree all you want. I'll take it up the chain. I've got full evidence of Catherine's affair with you. Making it a fair 50-50 split is already generous." Calvin slammed the divorce papers in front of me, glaring, "Aren't you a man? Leave all the assets to the woman in a divorce. The only problem with this document is the asset allocation, car and house ownership. I'll draft a new contract, everything else stays, but all property, including car and house, goes to Catherine, and you walk out with nothing." Obviously, it was unfair. I bit my lip hard, staring him down without a word. He calmly watched me, letting me mull over the situation in my head. Even Catherine seemed a little bothered by Calvin's shamelessness. Even if I handed her everything, she wouldn't be at ease with it. Catching my breath after a while, I made up my mind. With his family's power, whether we separated now or in the future, Calvin would meddle. Better to get the divorce over now. Though I've lost a lot these years, I'll finally be free, and my parents can live peacefully. I'm still young. I can start afresh, earn anew. I made up my mind, draft the contract, I'll sign. Calvin's face lit up with a smug smile, signaling his goons to bring out a new contract. Clearly, it was pre-prepared. Catherine's gaze faltered. Maybe she didn't expect me to be so decisive. It was my determination to break away. After signing the divorce papers, I turned to leave, but Calvin grabbed my wrist. I shook him off, face cold. It's signed, we're divorced. What do you want now? He laughed wickedly. Just 'cause you act tough. How dare you be with Catherine when I was abroad? You had the nerve to expose me having a wife trying to ruin things with Catherine. I'd be failing if I didn't teach you a lesson. He gestured to his goons. Guys, I won't be too hard on him. Just take a hand. They closed in, pushing me into a corner. Things looked bleak till the civil affairs office doors burst open. Stop, a powerful male voice echoed. Leading the pack was a public figure, Calvin's dad, Mike, with a blonde, blue-eyed woman, Wendy, standing beside him. Four uniformed officers stood behind them. Calvin was dumbfounded, stammering, Dad, Wendy, why are you here? Mike stormed over, slapping Calvin. You bring shame to us. How dare you impersonate an official? Calvin retorted, unswayed, Dad, with our power, what's wrong with me playing official? Another slap from Mike shut him up. Mike's eyes darted to Wendy, worried she'd be mad. I turned to Calvin and Catherine. Here, clear things up in front of your dad and wife. Wendy pushed through the crowd, standing by me. Hi, you're Jack, right? You claimed my husband cheated. Produce your evidence. Mike, regaining his arrogance, barked, That's right. Can you prove it? If you don't, I won't let you off. Catherine panicked, seeing her lover's wife there. Though she looked dejected, she snarled, Calvin's right. How dare you accuse us without proof? Her words inadvertently revealed their secret. Calmly, I pulled a voice recorder from my pocket, opened my phone, and found a few pre-saved clips. These proved their affair. After Mike and Wendy listened to the audio and watched the videos, their faces turned ominously dark. Mike kicked Calvin's knee hard. You disgrace. Who begged me to propose to Wendy back then? Get down on your knees and apologize to Wendy ASAP. Calvin didn't hesitate much and went straight down on his knees in front of Wendy. Wendy didn't even glance at him. She looked at Mike and said, You guys have a word for it, loyalty. I don't want my beliefs tainted by him. You heard the recording, right? How did he talk about me? If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, the cooperation between our two families is over. Mike gritted his teeth and squatted down. Calvin, this time I have to cut you off. There are so many employees and everyone has to eat. No matter the rank, everyone's equal when it comes to the law. You're an adult, and you should face the consequences of your actions. Calvin stared blankly at his dad, shaking his head madly. Dad, you can't just leave me. Who cares if the business in the UK is lost? Would you really give up your own son for profit? Mike raised his voice a couple of notches. Calvin, getting into fights and impersonating an official, you've got criminal evidence against you. Officers, please take him back and let the law decide. I, Mike, promise in front of everyone present that during Calvin's sentence, I won't help him in any way. I won't even use my connections to reduce his sentence. Four uniformed officers walked forward slowly, but then Catherine stepped in. You all can't take him. A desperately lost Calvin found Catherine and yanked her hair, punching her hard in the face. You sneaky woman. It's all your fault. If you hadn't talked about feelings, I'd never have wanted you. You old, ugly hag. Get lost. Even if you divorced Jack, I wouldn't want you. Mike looked at his son with a disheartened gaze. Wendy coldly watched everything unfold, her expression unreadable. Catherine shielded her face with her hands, losing any previous arrogance in front of me. She pleaded, Honey, don't hit me. You said you'd marry me after I got divorced. No matter what happens, I'll stand by your side. Calvin became more frenzied, with blood coming from Catherine's nose and mouth. Then you go to jail for me. You're not my wife. You're Jack's wife. Finally, Mike couldn't take it anymore and shouted, Enough! You disgraceful fool! Aren't you embarrassed enough? Calvin stood frozen, tears of regret streaming down his face. Eventually, the police took him away, and 2 days later, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I thought I'd lose everything after the divorce. But to my surprise, Wendy, to thank me for the tip-off, handed me a bank card. It had a whopping $500,000 inside. At first, I tried to refuse, but I couldn't decline anymore and had to accept it. Once I sorted things out, I headed home, packed my suitcase, and looked quietly at the house I had personally chosen. It held so many memories. Just as I was deep in thought, Catherine suddenly kneeled at my feet. Her eyes read, "Jack, you can't leave me alone. Calvin's in jail, and if you leave, I won't have anyone to support me." I was stunned. Couldn't believe she'd have the nerve to say that. I replied, annoyed, "We're divorced. Why should I support you?" She got desperate. "Jack, I really love you." I was just confused, listening to Calvin's lies. "Don't forget, we have 7 years together." I raised my voice. "Did you think about our 7 years when you called me a loser? Did you think about our bond when you used my entire month's salary to buy your boyfriend a watch? Did you think about us when you slept with Calvin? Did you remember our years when you demanded my parents' money for a house remodel? You talking about love? Seriously?" After I finished, Catherine didn't argue, just knelt there, sobbing. Looking at her expression, I knew she truly regretted it. I spoke in a calmer voice. "You need to understand, there's no love between us anymore. You actually love Calvin. Talking about love now shows you only care about my ability because, without me, you wouldn't even have pocket money." Seeing the marks on her face made me chuckle inside. When we were together, I'd feel guilty even raising my voice to her. "Oh, and about the assets, those are all yours now. The new house and car downstairs are in your name. Remember to make the monthly payments or they might get repossessed." After saying all that, I turned and left without a second thought. After this ordeal, I didn't stay, but returned to my hometown. I owed my parents so much over these years. It was time to repay them. I didn't rebuild the old house, but used Wendy's money to buy a house in town. It's over 1,000 square feet. Plenty of room for the 3 of us. After returning home, I realized life could be so pleasantly easy. Living with Catherine was tiring, not just physically, but mentally exhausting. I had to constantly pay attention to her emotional needs and ended up ignoring my own. Being with her meant walking on eggshells every day, always trying to find ways to make her happy. I don't even dare to think back on how tough my life used to be. In our relationship, I felt like a miserable wet dog. Later, from what my former friends told me, after I left, Catherine could barely make enough money to support herself. She even started to learn how to be thrifty, living at a much lower standard compared to when she was with me. Eventually, the car and the house went into foreclosure because she couldn't keep up with the payments. She ended up renting a basement, struggling to keep going. I found a job in my hometown doing what I used to do, except now I'm selling medical equipment instead of cars. I'm pretty good at it, and pretty soon my performance was strong, earning about 50 to 60 grand a month. Gradually, I let go of the unpleasant memories. I only remember spending 4 years at university there and then staying another 7 years after graduation. I poured 7 years into one girl, only to be betrayed in the end. 3 years later, I got a call from police department after work. Calvin was out. Just a couple of days earlier, Catherine had stabbed Calvin to death on the street with a watermelon knife. Calvin had just gotten out of prison and was a bit twisted in his thinking, blaming Catherine for everything. A couple of nights before, he asked her to a bar under the pretense of rekindling old feelings. At the bar, Calvin spiked Catherine's drink, leading to her being assaulted by 5 or 6 men he had set up. Catherine was furious. She ambushed Calvin on his way home, catching him off guard and stabbing him to death. Catherine was convicted of murder, with the death penalty being a certainty. Her dying wish, though, was to see me one last time to apologize. I flatly refused because I saw no point. We'd been divorced for over 3 years, and I'd moved on. I'd rather keep those memories buried for good. 6 months later, I started dating someone new. She's not as striking as Catherine was, but she's polite and gentle. Most importantly, she truly cares about me and treats me well, just like how I once treated Catherine. Our married life is relaxed and easygoing, not one-sided like the last marriage. She's considerate and cheers me up whether I'm happy or down, never belittling me. I finally feel like I've found the right person. I firmly believe that the future will only get brighter.